The last morning of their trip dawned clear and bright. The sky over Charleston, South Carolina, was painted with soft hues of pink and gold. Claire stood by the window of their small hotel room, watching as the city slowly woke up. The salty breeze from the nearby harbor drifted in through the open window, carrying the promise of something new. David was already up, quietly packing the car in the parking lot. The heaviness that had settled over him throughout the trip seemed lighter now, as if some invisible burden had been lifted. Or at least shared. Claire joined him outside, her suitcase in hand. They moved together in a quiet rhythm, the familiarity between them growing with every passing moment. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It was a peaceful pause. The space where healing had begun. As they drove through the historic streets of Charleston, Claire couldn't help but notice how different things felt. The city's cobblestone roads and colorful buildings seemed like a metaphor for the patchwork of her own heartbroken pieces stitched together with care and hope. They stopped at a small cafe overlooking the water. David ordered 2 coffees, and they sat outside, watching the boats drift gently by. The conversation was light at first, filled with stories from the road and plans for the future. But then David's voice grew quieter, more serious. "Claire," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "I want to thank you for coming with me on this journey, for being patient with me." Claire squeezed his hand gently. "It wasn't easy, but I think we needed this, both of us." David nodded. "I never told you this, but there were times I was scared I'd lose you too. Not just as a daughter, but as the person I care about most." Claire's heart swelled. "You didn't lose me." "No," he said softly, "but I was afraid of what the future held." They sat together, hands entwined, feeling the quiet strength of family and forgiveness. Later that afternoon, Claire met Ethan again, this time by chance at a local art gallery. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, smiling warmly. Claire smiled back. "I didn't expect to be here either." They walked through the gallery, surrounded by paintings and photographs that captured moments of beauty and pain. Ethan told her about his recent projects, and Claire shared stories from the road. There was an unspoken understanding between them, delicate balance between hope and hesitation, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. Ethan turned to Claire. "I know you're still figuring things out," he said gently, "but if you ever want to explore more, or just talk, I'm here." Claire felt a flutter in her chest. "I'd like that." They stood quietly, for a moment, the world around them fading into the background. Back at the hotel, Claire found her father waiting in the lobby. He looked tired, but there was a new softness in his eyes. "Ready to head home?" he asked. Claire nodded. "I think so." As they drove back toward Eugene, the miles felt different, lighter, filled with possibility instead of fear. The trip had changed them both. It had opened old wounds, yes, but it had also stitched new threads of understanding and love. A few weeks later, Claire found herself sitting on her porch reading a letter from her father. He had written it during the drive home, a letter full of apologies, love, and hope for the future. She read his words over and over, feeling the distance between them close just a little more with each line. The journey was over, but their story was just beginning. Claire looked up from the letter and smiled, thinking about everything she had learned, about love that doesn't always look perfect, about heartbreak that can lead to healing, about the courage it takes to open your heart again, and, most of all, about family, the ties that bind us even when we think they might break. In the months that followed, Claire stayed in touch with Ethan. They shared small moments, texts, calls, visits that blossomed into something tender and real. Her relationship with her father continued to grow, grounded now in honesty and forgiveness. They talked more openly, laughed more freely, and even planned a trip together this time. Just the two of them. Claire knew life would never be perfect. There would still be challenges, heartbreak, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that the journey, both on the road and within her heart, had made her stronger. And no matter what happened next, she was ready. "Did you have a good time?" he asked quietly. Claire hesitated. "Yeah, I did." David looked away, jaw tight. "You're growing up, Claire. That means you'll make mistakes." She felt a flicker of frustration. "I'm not a child." "No," he said, voice softer now, "but I'm still your father. I want to protect you." Claire took a deep breath. "Q can't protect me from everything, Dad." Key looked at her, eyes full of something like regret. "I know, and that terrifies me." The moment stretched between them, heavy with the weight of their unspoken feelings. Claire wanted to tell him everything, the loneliness, the fear, the small hope she felt when she was with Ethan, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she went to bed with a quiet heart, wondering if this trip was about more than just visiting a friend's funeral. Maybe it was about finding the courage to face the past and the future. The next day, they set out again. The roads were slick from the rain, the sky still gray and full of clouds. David drove with a steady hand, but Claire noticed his fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. During a brief stop at a roadside cafe, Claire found herself alone with Ethan again. He'd come along with some locals who knew the area. They talked quietly in the corner, sharing stories and laughter. Ethan looked at her with that same kindness. "If you ever want to see the world through my lens," he said, "I'll be around." Claire smiled, but inside she felt torn. This trip was supposed to be about her dad, about family, about history. But Ethan was something new, something alive. That night in the motel room, David broke the silence. "I'm sorry if I seem distant," he said quietly. "I'm not used to this." Claire looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "Watching you grow up, seeing you with someone else, it's harder than I thought." She reached out, touching his hand. "I'm still your daughter. No one can take that away." David's eyes softened, but the sadness remained. "Sometimes I wonder if I lost you a long time ago." Claire's heart cracked open a little more. The days passed and the miles rolled beneath the tires. With each stop, with each conversation, Claire felt her father slowly peel back the layers he had hidden for years. She realized this trip wasn't just about crossing states, was about crossing the distance between them. And while Ethan remained a soft light on the edges of her heart, the real journey was learning to understand the man who had always been there, even when he seemed far away. As the road stretched ahead, Claire knew one thing for sure. This trip was changing everything, not just for her father, but for herself. The road from Tennessee to North Carolina felt heavier than any stretch Claire had ever driven. The sky was overcast, a soft gray blanket that seemed to press down on the world below. Her father, David, was quiet as usual, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but Claire could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. They stopped at a small rest area, nestled near the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place where the air smelled like pine and rain, and the silence felt thick with memories. David stepped out first, taking a deep breath, and Claire followed. They sat on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the winding roads below, the mountains rising like silent witnesses around them. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Dad?" she said softly. "Did you love Mom?" David's eyes didn't leave the horizon. "I did. I do." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous. "Then why did you let her go?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David's shoulders sagged, and he finally looked at her. His eyes were heavy with years of regret. "Sometimes loving someone isn't enough. Not when you're fighting battles inside yourself that no one else can see." Claire felt her chest tighten. She had suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud was different, heartbreaking, and real. "Did you ever want to fight for her?" "For us?" she asked. David hesitated. "Every day. But sometimes when you don't love yourself, it's hard to fight for anyone else." The confession hung between them, fragile and painful. Claire reached out and took his hand, surprising them both with the gesture. "You did your best, Dad. I see that now." Tears welled in David's eyes, but he blinked them away stubbornly. That night, Claire lay awake in the motel bed, the moonlight casting soft shadows across the room. Her phone buzzed gently beside her. Message from Ethan. She hadn't expected to hear from him again after leaving Colorado. The message was simple. "You made something wake up in me. Thank you. I hope our paths cross again." Claire smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, the car was packed again. The funeral was only a day away, but the emotional weight of the trip was catching up to them both. David seemed more distant than ever, retreating into himself like a man running from ghosts. Claire understood now that this journey was as much about his own healing as it was about hers. During a stop in a small town in Virginia, Claire took the chance to call her mother. She wanted to understand more, to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Her mother's voice was gentle, full of years of love and pain. She told Claire stories about David's youth, the boy who had dreamed of being a musician, who loved fiercely but was often afraid to show it. "Your dad has always carried a lot of weight," her mother said. "But he loves you more than you know." Claire held the phone close, feeling the fragile thread that connected their broken family. That evening, David and Claire sat outside the motel under a sky bursting with stars. The quiet was different, now not heavy, but hopeful. David finally spoke. "I'm sorry for the things I couldn't say when you were younger. For the silence, the distance." Claire looked at him, her heart full. "I'm sorry too. For the walls I built around my heart." They sat in silence, hands intertwined. Some wounds didn't heal overnight, but in that moment, they both felt the first crack. The day of the funeral arrived. It was small and quiet, held in a church surrounded by trees. David gave a eulogy that surprised everyone, honest, poetic, full of memories and love. Claire watched her father, seeing him not as the distant man she'd known, but as a person who had loved deeply and lost painfully. After the service, they drove in silence for hours, the weight of loss settling around them. When they stopped for the night, Claire took the wheel. For the first time on the trip, she drove, feeling the responsibility and freedom that came with it. David sat beside her, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. As the miles passed beneath them, Claire realized that this trip was more than a journey across states. It was a journey toward understanding, forgiveness, and maybe even love. She thought about Ethan and the way he had made her feel alive again. She thought about her father, the battles he had fought in silence, and the courage it took to keep going. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but Claire knew one thing. She was ready to face it. Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming mug of coffee in front of her. The sun was just beginning to rise outside their small home in Eugene, Oregon, casting a soft orange glow over the quiet street. It was summer break, and she was supposed to be somewhere else, probably downtown Portland with her friends, laughing over iced coffees and talking about the future like it was an open road with endless possibilities. But here she was instead, waiting for her mother to come into the room with news that would change everything. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the table, breaking the silence. Claire's heart skipped a beat when she saw her mother's name on the screen. Usually the calls were quick, everyday things, reminders to pick up groceries or a question about the house. But this time, something felt different. The voice on the other end was soft, tired. "Claire, your dad, he needs you. He wants to take a road trip across the country, but he doesn't want to drive alone. It's important." Claire blinked, confused. Her dad, David, had always been a quiet man, not someone who talked much about his feelings or plans. Since the divorce, things between them had been distant, awkward. Her mother didn't explain much more, but Claire knew this wasn't just a simple drive. There was something deeper underneath. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "His childhood best friend passed away. It's hard for him. He doesn't want to fly, and he wants to visit some places before the funeral. Please, Claire, could you go with him? Claire hesitated. She had her own plans, her own life waiting. And she didn't know if she was ready for this. The memories of her parents arguing the night her dad left, the silences that followed, they all bubbled up in her chest like a storm she didn't want to face. But something about the sadness in her mother's voice, the way her father's name seemed so heavy, made her nod without really thinking. I'll do it, she said quietly. Packing was the first real sign that this wasn't just a casual trip. Claire grabbed a few clothes, her laptop, and some books, but mostly she packed her nervousness into the suitcase. When she walked out to the driveway, the black Chevy was waiting, old but sturdy. Just like her dad, David was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, looking at the horizon like he was trying to see through the distance. He didn't say much when Claire got in the car. The silence between them felt thick, almost like a wall built from years of misunderstandings and unspoken words as they pulled out of the driveway. The city slowly slipped behind them, replaced by endless fields and open sky. The radio played. Soft songs from a playlist David had made, mostly classic rock, and a few folk songs Claire didn't recognize. For hours. They drove without speaking. Claire tried to read, tried to pretend the trip was just another road adventure. But every time she glanced at her dad, she saw a shadow in his eyes, sadness she didn't understand. That night, they stopped at a small motel in a town just outside Denver. The air was cool and rain started falling softly against the windows. At dinner, they sat across from each other in a quiet diner, the kind with red vinyl booths and checkered floors. David stared into his coffee cup, lost in thought, while Claire picked at her food, unsure how to start a conversation. That's when Ethan appeared. He was behind the counter, wiping glasses with a worn towel, his dark hair falling just enough over his forehead to make Claire notice him. When he smiled, it was easy and warm, like the sun breaking through a cloudy day. Hey, you two look like you've been on the road for a while, he said, sliding a fresh cup of coffee toward Claire. First time visiting Colorado. Claire smiled shyly. Yeah, just passing through. David looked up, his eyes sharp but polite. It's a long trip. Ethan nodded, his gaze flickering between father and daughter. Got family out east? He asked casually. Something like that, David said, his voice low. Claire watched the way Ethan looked at her, not like a stranger, but like someone trying to see past the surface. He had this quiet confidence, but also kindness, like he cared about the people sitting in his diner more than just as customers as the rain picked up outside. Ethan shared stories about the town, the mountains, and the sky, how the weather here could change in minutes, just like life. Claire found herself laughing, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. David said little, but Claire noticed how his fingers tapped nervously on the table, how his jaw clenched every time Ethan talked to her. It was like he was fighting something inside himself. When the rain finally stopped, Ethan offered to show Claire a little of the town before the roads got bad again. David hesitated but then nodded. You have until 10. Not a minute later. He warned. Claire felt a flutter of excitement and guilt all at once. She was breaking the rules, stepping out into a world that felt both strange and inviting. Walking through the quiet streets with Ethan under the glow of old street lamps, Claire realized how much she'd missed connection. Ethan talked about his dreams, how he wanted to be a photographer, capturing moments most people overlooked. Claire shared stories about college, her fears, and the weight of her broken family. Ethan listened like it mattered, like her words were important. It was new for Claire to feel that way. When they stopped near a small park bench, Ethan didn't lean in for a kiss. Instead, he rested his forehead gently against hers. It was a simple gesture, but it made Claire's heart race. It was the beginning of something she didn't fully understand, yet something tender, real and hopeful. Back at the motel, the quiet between Claire and David was heavier than before. Her dad's face was unreadable, but she could see a storm. Behind his eyes, fear, regret, longing. He didn't say anything, but Claire felt the weight of everything they hadn't said pressing down on them both. That night, as Claire lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, wondering what this trip would bring. Was it just about visiting places from the past? Or was it about something deeper, about healing wounds that had never really closed? She thought about Ethan's smile, his soft voice, and the way the rain had washed away the heaviness, even if just for a moment. The road ahead was long, and Claire wasn't sure where it would lead. But one thing was clear. This journey was already changing her, and maybe, just maybe, it could change her father too. The next morning, the air was crisp and cool outside the small motel in Boulder, Colorado. The rain from the night before had washed the streets clean, leaving puddles that shimmered under the soft morning light. Claire wrapped her arms around herself as she stepped outside, breathing in the fresh mountain air. It smelled like pine trees and new beginnings, a sharp contrast to the heaviness that still weighed on her heart. David was already outside, leaning against the car, staring up at the sky with a thoughtful expression. When Claire approached, he looked down and gave a small nod. The silence between them felt different, now less strained. More like two people circling the edges of something neither was ready to say aloud. "I'm going to get breakfast," Claire said softly, her voice breaking the quiet. David grunted in agreement. At the diner where they had eaten the night before, Ethan was already working, wiping tables and arranging chairs. His presence felt familiar now, like a small light in the corner of Claire's world. When he saw her, his eyes brightened with recognition. "Morning," he said, sliding a cup of black coffee across the counter to her. "Sleep well?" Claire smiled shyly. "Better than I expected." Ethan glanced at the car parked outside, then back at Claire. "You're still here. That means the roads must be bad." Claire nodded. "The rain flooded some streets. We're stuck for a bit." He shrugged. "Could be worse. Sometimes it's nice to slow down." That afternoon, Claire found herself walking with Ethan through the quiet streets of Boulder. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, casting a soft gray light over everything. The two of them wandered without a plan, exploring small bookstores, colorful murals, and the winding paths of a nearby park. David had warned her to be back by 10. But Claire felt a strange pull to stay. With Ethan, time felt different, lighter, more hopeful. She wanted to hold on to this feeling, even if just for a little while. As they walked, Ethan talked about his dreams of becoming a photographer. "I want to capture things people usually miss," he said, eyes shining, like the way light falls on a broken window or the expression on someone's face just before they smile. Claire listened, fascinated by his passion. She told him about her studies, her hopes for the future, and the things she was scared of, like never being good enough for either her parents or herself. Ethan didn't judge. He just nodded and listened. At one point, they sat on a bench overlooking the mountains, the wind tugging gently at Claire's hair. Ethan reached out and brushed a stray strand behind her ear. The gesture was small, tender, but it sent a rush through her chest she wasn't expecting. "Claire," he said softly, "you don't have to carry everything on your own. You can let someone in." Her heart ached. It was true. For so long, she had built walls around her pain, around her heart. But here, with Ethan, the walls felt like they could crumble. When she returned to the motel later that evening, the smile she carried faded the moment she saw her dad waiting on the porch. His eyes were dark, tired, but when they met hers, she saw something else, something unspoken, like a warning.